He was the best professor I had at Union. He has served in Africa, he has served in India. He is a wonderful teacher, he's a wonderful friend, and he's a good Presbyterian, so Adrian Burke.
Elizabeth. Yeah, Elizabeth. Oh, my goodness. I'm gonna give you a hug. They tell us when we're teaching that we shouldn't really have our favorites, but it's actually impossible because you're just drawn to those students who are so passionate and so gifted and have so many talents. And right from the get-go, Elizabeth just proved to be one of the students that thrived in that environment. And of course, the classroom is a learned experience for everybody. We would share text together and just scratch our heads and wrestle with the issue of the day. So it's just a great privilege to know and call Elizabeth friend. So this morning, your mic. Always Gerald was here. Apologies, it seems to switch off. Going into my pocket, I'll be careful this time. So this morning, I ummed and ahed about what I would do, and in the end, I just thought I would share some stories, if that's okay. Stories of a Peace USA mission co-worker. I had the privilege with my wife of serving in South India as a mission co-worker. But my travels were always faith-based. Wherever I went, it was an opportunity to learn, to share stories, and ultimately to think about how good news could be shared amongst those we would encounter. So today's really just an exploration of some of those travels and the challenges that we faced while we were a part of the world's church. So I spent several years in Zimbabwe. I was working with displaced communities, those children who were forced out of their communities, out of their home environments because of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. I had nowhere else to go. There was no structure of support where they were from, and so they had to find their way to the major cities. And I was located in Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe. I was actually working as a volunteer development service officer with the Ministry of Education, Sports and Culture. But my true passion was connecting with the churches and finding out what they were doing so that I could partner with them as best I could. And I was introduced to the Presbyterian mission co-workers who were there at the time, who were a part of this particular home here. It's Love More Children's Home, which is a PCUSA supported home in Zimbabwe. Taking some of those kids that were displaced on the streets and just effectively setting up something of a home environment, putting them through school, giving them some good opportunities to thrive in a difficult environment. And so this became my passion, just being a part of this community, getting to meet the children. So folks quickly started to realize that I had a heart for the displaced children. And so I was asked to come and lead Bible studies in the park, and I would do so. Eventually that led to me not leading the Bible studies, but letting them choose the passages, and I became the great learner. They became my teachers. But I started to get involved with the displaced communities, and it was a transformed experience of my life, very pivotal in shaping my theology, shaping my understanding of what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Some of the times I would go to this place to worship. It was the Anglican Cathedral, which happened to be right next to my office. And so the convenience of that was very helpful. And this particular church had a program where many of these displaced children could come and they would receive a hot drink in the morning and some food, some breakfast that would sustain many of them for the rest of the day, unless they could scavenge for food somewhere else. So I really appreciated the work that this church was doing and being a space, an area inside the gates of the church where these children could find community, education, and sustenance for their day. But then we heard an announcement that the church leaders had come together and said this program could no longer take place, at least inside the gates of the church. They said, you know, this is not a good look for our church. These kids are not a good look for our community. And so the decision was made that these children were not to come into the grounds of the church to receive this sustenance that they had. This was a great challenge for me at the time, as I questioned, who is the church? What is the church for? Should we not be a people that is on the move, crossing boundaries from church to world? So one Christmas Eve, the children still did gather by the church, by the way. They just weren't allowed in to the car park. The car park is just to the side here. The gates were locked, no entry. But the kids continued to meet, and those who were serving them continued to meet and serve the children. One Christmas Eve, I was invited to come and be a part of this service, and it struck me as really strange. We would be meeting with the children outside the gates of the church as folks were coming to the church service for Christmas. Yeah. And they were dressed all in the nines, beautiful colors and dress. And they would park their cars away, and then they would walk as far around these kids as possible, so there would be no interaction at all. They walked all the way around so that there would be no interaction encounter, and then into the gates of the church. The gates were opened, they would come in and be closed. And that morning, or Christmas morning, I was back there and found myself listening to these hymns being sung, these familiar Christmas carols and hymns that I had loved growing up, while I was standing outside with the children and the folks who were helping serve the children. And it was so sad to me that there seemed to be this divide, a literal divide between church and world, between the church and the kids. I asked myself the question that day, where is Christ present right now? I was angry, I was young, and the answer to me was very clear, that Jesus is not there in that church. Jesus is here. As a young person of faith, this separation between church and world meant a lot to me. And I started to realize Christ is not present in church. Christ is present in the world. So I became a bit of an activist, a bit of a protester against the church. Now, over the years, I realized that my answer to that question was not correct. It's not my decision to say where Christ is and is not. But in that moment, that's how it felt. And I realized that my life is going to be trying to connect with marginalized communities around the world, because I truly felt that Christ was present. I do now think Christ was present in the church. Don't hear me wrong. But it still felt clumsy to me, this sharp distinction between one place and the other. You might recall that for the World Council of Churches, which gathered in Harare, that this great man came to speak, to really lay down the gauntlet, lay down the challenge about what it meant to be not just the church or part of faith-based communities, but to be people standing up against those powers that would divide us, that would want us to be separated, that would mean there could be no spaces for reconciliation, a genuine divide. It was another visible and invisible separation of one community from another. And of course, we think back to the apartheid regime. But he challenged us to think about all those places, those visible and invisible boundaries that keep us separated from one another, and the ideologies and the power that allows those divisions to stay so fixed. He urged us to cross boundaries. Now, in preparation for this great conference, the government approached me, government leaders, and said, Adrian, we know that you've connected with the displaced communities. It would be great. It would be great if you could mobilize some of them. We are going to send some of our leaders, our government leaders, our ministers. The president's wife is going to be there. Mugabe's wife was going to be there. Could you mobilize some of these kids so that they can tell stories to us? What is it like to be displaced like you are? And so I went to my network of people and said, look, would you be interested in sharing some of your voice, of your stories to these people who can make a difference? They're the policymakers. I had a naivety that this was a really good thing. And so I was able to barter with these kids and say, hey, there's going to be some good food and we can gather together. And through your poetry and your artwork and your song, you can tell the people in power that this is who you are and you are here and you are Zimbabwean and you love this country. And so we had an incredible day where these kids were able to share their stories and their struggles, their difficulties, and their strategies of survival. I was so proud of them. They did a magnificent job. But a little bit later, those government officials got together and they knew they had a World Council of Churches coming. What do we do with the elephant in the room, with so many kids wandering around the streets of Harare? We don't want this to be the image that we send out to the world. I go into a meeting in the government offices and they say, our strategy moving forward is to just round up the children and make them leave the city. Oh, excuse me. You heard the stories. You have the power to make some differences, to put in policies and procedures and strategies to do something positive. They said the problems are too big. This is the only solution we have. And so began this Operation Street Sweep, where kids were just collected and taken to different parts outside of Harare and literally left on the side of the road with very, very clear instructions: do not come back into the city. This was a shock to me. When folks did find their way back into Harare, of course they did, because this was now their home, they found me and they assumed that I had been part of it all along. Here's this guy, I'm working in the government offices, and I had secretly conspired with them, this good Christian guy coming from another part of the world, secretly conspired with government officials to ruse these kids to come and share their stories so they could be seen, identified, and kicked out. The death threats were there against me, against my colleagues and friends, and it was difficult for me as somebody who had great intentions, as from a faith well, to come and say, I want to be here, I want to be a part of the struggle that can help you. And it all backfired. That good intentions was clearly mixed with a lot of naivety about the way things work. It was a difficult period for me, questioning why I was there. What was God doing, bringing me to a place like this where my good intentions could just be shattered so clearly? I was able to meet those who had wanted me to have some injury and sit with them and plead with them to say I was not a part of what the government action was. It was a difficult time for me, realizing that in the context of a faith-based well, we must choose our partners wisely, ask good questions, become aware. What are our goals? Where is the integrity of the process? And I learned in that moment that really it should have been some of the kids who were alongside me in those government spaces saying, well, what's the deal here? What's the negotiations? What's going on here really? So it took away that sense of me as the white, privileged British guy with an education list quite long, could come in and act as something of a fixer on behalf of Jesus. It was a struggle. One of the kids that we've been working with ended up going to the prison cells, and he called me, or had somebody call on my behalf. I went to visit him in the cells. And he came out and he was freezing cold. He was close to naked, and he had been in the cells with other displaced children for a couple of days, hadn't received food, he'd had a little bit of water. And he sat there and he looked at me. He said, Adrian, I called you because I wanted to ask you a question. I'm here. He said, where is that Jesus you've been talking about? You come and you sit with us in the park and you talk about Jesus, and it's so eloquent and good, but where is Jesus now? I could have said, don't worry, he's right there with you. He's right there with you. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I was shocked by the question, but it didn't feel like a genuine answer to me at the time. Again, likely I was wrong, but all I could say to him was, I don't know. I don't know. But when you get out of here, let's figure it out together. Let's figure it out together. And so when he came out, we started to walk. We started to talk. We started to chat about faith. But it wasn't me guiding the agenda or pointing to the scripture passages. We did it alongside one another. A journey of solidarity together in faith as we scratched our heads, as we cried, as we laughed, as we tried to figure it out one day to the next. And he became a really good friend of mine. And I said earlier, those Bible studies changed a little. It suddenly wasn't me choosing the passage and telling everybody what it meant and what it means for you. Instead, it became, what's going on here? You pick the passages. Let's digest what's being said. Let's pray and see what God will have us all learn in this moment. And that's been a commitment I have had in every step of my life. Even as I work at Queen's, a willingness to not give clean, easy answers to people when they have their good questions, but to say, I don't know, well, let's figure it out together. And I commit to journeying alongside you for as long as you would like me to, and form that relationship that is trusting that God will reveal God's self to us as we ask those questions together. I'm going to jump to a different place in the world, if that's okay. If this will let me. So Julie is a pastor at Sharon Presbyterian Church, and she was invited as a PCUSA member, a co-worker, to go and work as the pastor in the Church of South India. And I was the teacher. So we went together, and my job was to work in a children's home called Karanalium. Karanalium was a home that was for children who had a whole range of different abilities and disabilities on a whole wide range of different spectrums. And I was there to learn and to be part of the education training piece. It was a beautiful home. Oftentimes, these kids were from communities that were not able to sustain those kids in their home environments because both parents needed to work and there just wasn't the support in the local communities. So the privilege of working in this space. Here's a picture of my wife, Julie. We would play with the kids, have a great time. This is a picture of the sanctuary, Emmanuel Church in Cochin, South Carolina, in which we worked together. Many people, it's a bit of a theme here, many people would come to the gates of the church, which were not locked, but folks would not come into the church grounds. Many of them were from the Dalit community. That's the community that was formerly known as the outcast community. And if you know anything about caste system or the power embedded into these structures, it's very real, even though officially caste doesn't exist anymore. we know. A human hierarchy is a very real thing. So folks would gather outside the church. And so Julie and I, we were fresh off the boat, if you like, off the plane, saying, look, there's some people who are gathering here. Is it possible for us to start something of a food security program where we could invite folks in to receive some bread, something to eat, some rice, and then start to hear the stories of the people who were there. So we went to the pastor and we're so excited about this. Yeah, still with but this is we're doing it properly. Peace USA mission co-workers, look at us in action. So we go to the pastor of the church of another church actually and say, Thomas John, you'll see him in the next slide. Thomas John, pastor, we are thinking it'd be great if we could just invite folks into the grounds of the church. What better way to share Christ's love? And he said, no. Pastor, no. Come on, isn't it the need, resource, bring together, bridge, share, community, Christ's love? No. Well, remember Zimbabwe? With separation? My head was doing a spin. But then Thomas John said this. No, unless you're willing to ask the question, why are these people so poor and needy? What? He said, I'm not interested in just setting up an initiative where we're going to feed the poor. Charity is good, not knocking it. He wasn't knocking it. But he said, for our church, if our church is not willing to ask the question, why are these people poor? Why are they considered outcast? Why are they considered the marginalized? If you're not interested in asking those questions, the answer is no. Another learning moment for our young mission co-worker and Julie as well. And so we started to think in several different layers. How could we bridge those gaps? And eventually the program did happen, but everybody who was part of it had to commit to asking those harder questions of why, so that they could translate this, yes, building relationships, sharing the love of God through Christ, but also being willing to advocate, to walk side by side with new friends who you now know their names. And so the church became a buzz over the next year with folks coming to church and greeting one another, folks from outside the church coming in to sit in the sanctuary, and folks from the church going out and walking with new friends and new neighbors. How's the family doing? How's the week? Building relationships that were there to last. What do you need? How can your voices be amplified so that things can change? And yes, we're talking about systems can change locally, that the power dynamics can change, that the church is here willing to offer the charity, but also, really importantly, willing to ask the deeper questions around the context in which people come together. One last story, and then we'll open it up. What's our time, Elizabeth? How much time do we?
Robert?
Well, technically we have 30 minutes.
Ooh,
Maybe 2 stories.
You might miss-
But he has to have time to change. Get ready for sure.
this is Adrian Thomas John over here, who was just such a great mentor. As mission co-workers, we go and we don't go with all the answers. We go as oriented as we can to different parts of the world and try to understand their need. But I think for me, the work was done in learning about what is the church doing in a particular place of the world to make a difference? What are the questions that they are asking? And how do we be a part of supporting that work? And that's all we do. That's all we do. try to understand, try to listen, and offer our hands and feet as we are guided by the wisdom of those who know what they're talking about in their context. I'm going to share one example of how ignorant I was. We've got this new partnership. Julie and I come from Grace Presbytery in and around Texas. And we go to, a few weeks in, we go to a conference of all the pastors in that part of CSI in South India. And we sit there and there's a big argument going on. And Julie and I don't know what the argument is, but I'm saying to my colleague, my interpreter, what are they saying? They're saying there's a desperate need for us to have scriptures, for us to have Bibles. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a great win. I've come from Texas. We got loads of Bibles. We can sort that out, Julie. This is something we can do this really well. And it'll enhance our prestige as mission partners and all of that good stuff. So in my mind, having done good orientations and traveled to other parts of the world, I'm thinking it's an easy A to B fix with the support of the churches in Texas in Grace Presbytery. So I suggested this to my interpreter, and yeah, I'm thinking he's going to say, "Oh, Adrian, so glad you're here." But he looked at me with a kind of, "You idiot, you idiot." He didn't say that to me. He was very nice. What he said was, "No, it's not that we want scriptures. We want scriptures that are not coming in and being interpreted from people from outside who don't know our context. With all due respect to theologians and missionaries coming from the West, from the UK, from Europe and the United States, we need to be able to take these scriptures and understand them in our own languages, in our own context, because our languages are going to be our languages will be different, but our questions might be different than somebody else in a different context. What we need is our pastors to be able to have the time in the midst of a very busy schedule to actually interpret scriptures, do some writing that will benefit the church as a whole in their area. Oh, of course. I knew this. I'd been to seminary. But I was so quick to jump in and say, I have a fix for this. PCUSA co-workers often just find themselves in clumsy moments where they make clumsy decisions and fall into those categories of West in partnership with somewhere else. I should have known better. I wasn't naive at that point, but I was still going into these easy areas of fixability. So I started to work at the children's home. I was there for a good while. And then we got the news from Adrian, Thomas John, who said all the funding, 100% of the funding that comes from Europe to keep this children's home alive is going to disappear. That group has decided that they are going to divert their funds away from South India into actually a part of the world that was in need. This was devastating for the staff who would lose jobs. It was devastating for the families of the kids who knew that their kids couldn't be cared for. So Thomas John came to me and he said, hey, we have this great new partnership with Grace Presbytery in Texas. I want you to think of a proposal to come and offer to the Board of Trustees. You won't be the only one offering a proposal, but let's brainstorm ideas. Oof. I said, I can't do that. I can't do that without your help. Help educate me so that I can offer a proposal that is actually meaningful for this community in this context. Because one of the easiest possibilities, and you might already be thinking of this, would be for us to say, we do have the privilege of great resources in Grace Presbytery, and I know that a lot of those churches would have loved to sign the checks to be able to say, we will simply replace all the funding 100% so that children's home can still run. So you lose a donor, you gain a donor. The advantages for the churches in this newly formed partnership are obvious. We get to celebrate stories, we get to have a little bit of ownership on that. It's a sign of the fruit of this great partnership in full blossom. I suspected that that probably wasn't going to go down very well with Adrian Thomas John, and it didn't. So I met with him and I said, help me as we try to think about the proposal you've asked me to give. And his answer was quite stunning. He said, we might just need to close the home. Yes, that's difficult. Our kids will have to go into communities where they will not find the care that they need. We might just need to close the home. I went to talk to some of my other friends in the church. They said the same thing. The church, the home just might need to close. And folks started to say more. They said, Adrian, please don't go back to the US and say that you will just replace the funds, because it just humiliates us. It makes us feel this big. An easy ask on your part has a big consequence for us here. And they started to say, our bishop, and no disrespect if this is being recorded, our bishop will quickly jump and just put out both his hands and say, give. We don't want that. Okay, what can I do as a BCUSA co-worker? So I go back to Adrian Thomas John. I say, help me understand the nuances here. And he said, here's our children's home. We love it. We breathe life into it. And he said, but since we got 100% donor funds from Europe, guess what our churches around us have done? They don't come and visit. They know about it, but they don't invest in it. They don't support us in any way. Why? Because the dependency is there and they don't need to support it. He said, this is a Church of South India community initiative. He said, if our churches around us are not willing to put in the time, the energy, the effort, and in some cases, the funds and the resources to make this program thrive, it needs to end. Another great learning moment. So my proposal is really a proposal that's formed from speaking to folks who know what they're talking about on the ground. I'm getting a little bit of pressure from Grace Presbytery, who are kind of chomping at the bit, saying, we can. With great intentions, of course. Yeah, they're praying for us. They want to support us best they can, and they think this would be an easy fix. So in the end, the proposal was for a few of us to come together in solidarity and say, no, it's up to our churches. This is our program. Do we own it or do we leave it? And so from there, suddenly, invitations come to local church folks to come and visit. Come and help do a little bit of work here. Let's have a potluck lunch over here. Come and listen to the stories of the teachers who've been working day in, day out for years. Come and be a part of our community and get to know our children. And if you decide you're not interested in supporting it, we will close rather than simply be dependent on another foreign agent. The church owned it. And over the course of the next few months, the church not only owned it, but came alongside and journeyed with children, with staff, and the program started to flourish. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't support coming from the United States, from the churches here, but it wasn't on our terms. It was on their terms, as they said, look, actually, these are some areas where we would love for this relationship to blossom, as apart from you coming and doing some teaching here, but we would love for you to come, bring your folks to come and look at the great things the Church of South India is doing through a program like this, and let them then go and take stories back to say, when you show your pictures of what's happening in India, it's not going to be of the poor Dalit communities. It's going to be pictures of celebration about what the churches are doing because they feel the spirit is leading them. Powerful, powerful stories. Got time for another story. This brings us, so it was Zimbabwe to India to the United States. By the way, there's so many stories in between, so many opportunities for me to learn about what my faith means. So many moments to journey alongside folks who expose me to great new questions, show me God in revealing new ways that I hadn't even considered before. Taking some of those rough edges of me as an individual, smoothing them out in important ways, ready to be in solidarity at any point. So I worked in Texas as a chaplain in a children's home. And one Christmas, we're just sitting there in the chapel, actually. We were getting ready for Christmas, another Christmas story. See, I'm trying to link these things. It's another Christmas story, and we're just having some fun. These kids they were not orphans in the traditional sense of the word, but they were neglected children. Yeah, for parents who would say they would drop off their kids, or one of the parents would drop off the kids and say, "Don't worry, I will come and visit you. Don't worry, I'll be back soon." And in my 3 years there, nobody ever came back. So these kids felt like it was always their fault. It was largely never their fault, but that's what they felt. Many tears around, why don't they come and visit? So it's Christmas time and we're just decorating the chapel and we're having a lot of laughter, some singing. And we get word from the president the president of the Children's Homes and Services in Texas, and says, look, there's a church group coming. It's coming from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and these are big supporters. They give us a lot of donor funds. They're coming and they want to meet the children and give some gifts. I'm on the phone, I'm looking at the kids, they go, what are we doing? So kids, we've been asked to go back, get changed into our finest Sunday gear, and receive a group. Our church is coming in to give you some presents. And you can imagine the room like, no, we don't want to do it. Please don't let's do it. So in a sense, it's out of my hands. I tried to push back a little bit. Like, no, this is an important church group, and we need to do this. Has this church ever come before? Well, no, but they're hoping to build a relationship. Okay. So we go into one of the cottages and the children look their finest and they sit there on the floor as this group comes in and gives out these gifts, beautiful gifts, big gifts, small gifts. Yeah, shiny gifts. I'm sure Carol's playing in the background. And the kids have to open them one at a time, and put on the big smile, like, thank you. Thank you so much. So very much for this gift. Of course, it's a great photo opportunity. I won't let anybody take pictures of any of that. But afterwards, the group comes together and we do this, don't we? We like to take the picture. Well, let's get the sign in so that we know where we are. These folks from this church were amazing. They're beautiful. They had worked as a church to say, what's our Christmas thing that we're going to do? Oh, wouldn't it be great if we could support the Presbyterian Children's Homes and Services? To them, it was this beautiful idea, and it was a beautiful idea. Don't hear me wrong. And yet the reality for our kids was very different. They felt humiliated. They felt that they were the stereotypical poor children who were to receive this charity. And now they put on a great show. There was no signs of resistance, but slowly these kids, after they would open their present, would just excuse themselves and go away because they just felt embarrassed in that situation. Sometimes our good intentions are just not good enough, unless we think it through and talk to the right people and think about what we're really doing. From a theological perspective, from a missiological perspective, about how best to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world, to be disciples in this world. How quickly we play into these clumsy patterns where actually relationships don't really matter, where giving is done in a way where people can feel a little bit humiliated in the receiving of those good gifts. So what did we do? We said to the church, look, thank you for coming. We love your good intentions. Come back. But you don't need to bring the gifts next time. Come back in a month. Come and meet our kids. Get to know them. Take away this sense of, an us and them and something of a hierarchy. There it is again. Come and meet our kids. Get to know them. Find other ways that you can support. The church folks said, absolutely, we'll be back. They didn't come back in the time I was there. What's that all about? I think that onus, and I'm not going to get preachy, but the onus is for us to come to our churches and ask great questions. And I know you do that here because you've got folks like Elizabeth here, who is one of my favorites, not just because I like her so much, but because she's traveled, she understands the nuances. I'm sure been in clumsy positions where you've made some mistakes and think that you can find solutions, but actually a willingness to start listening to the stories of the people so that they can help form us and understand truly what is going on for our churches in different parts of the world. That's not a monolithic story. It's a story of struggle. It's a story of us we do need each other as a world communion of Christians. We'll celebrate World Communion today in solidarity with folks around the world. And I hope we're willing to step forward and say, let's not just silo ourselves out, but let's visit, let's support, let's take our good intentions and do something right. But in doing that, there's a lot of homework to be done by understanding context, by understanding and truly listening to partners around the world who are able to tell us what their needs are. And let's not have the arrogance or the assumptions in faith that we are the ones who come in as the great saviors or the great healers or the great fixers. Because in my experience, at least, that's never been the case. Okay, we've got time for some questions if anybody has any. About 5 minutes, I think 5 minutes.
Come on, y'all.
Oh, yes.
Something that. I don't know if this is true in all of our missions, but we go for usually for a week at a time. To relational ministries. And then it's, they're saying not enough time. It's time, but it's almost not enough time to do, what needs to be done. Well, it's never enough time to do what needs to be done in the way that you're suggesting. So can you give us a first bite? Because I don't know that we have the luxury of sending regular church members for longer periods of time. Or that's something people would want to do, or some of us have done that. But give us a first bite, like ABC, not the whole alphabet. If we have a week and we're on a relational ministry, and there are some jobs to be done, some built or something, or maybe not. Where do we actually start? I get the person to person contact, but your message has such teeth in it. Give us some of those starter teeth.
Such a great question. Thank you for asking it. I'm not going to do it very much justice, other than to say you kind of captured it in the words there, the relational ministry. If that's truly at the heartbeat of what we're doing, then I think that's great. I'm about to take a trip next Saturday to a part of the world that gives me some trepidation, and it will only be for 10 days. I'm not going to go and fix anything, but what we can do in those moments is hear stories of what the church, what the people are doing in the midst of their particular struggles. When I went to Zimbabwe, I went as a development officer. I told you that. We don't use that word anymore because it's that sense of you're helping develop somebody else. But at the time, it was a development officer. And one of the people who gave me an orientation said, your job as a development officer will begin the day you get back. Like, what are you talking about? I'm going to be a development officer. I'm going to give 3 years of my life as a development officer. And now looking back, he was right. The stories that I was able and privileged to accumulate needed to be told when I got back. Here's the stories of struggle, but here's the story of celebration and resilience of the people who have taught me a thing or two. So I'm actually a big fan of small trips going if they're done well. And that means a couple of things. Was anybody at the panel at Queen's University or part of the trip that went to Northern Ireland recently? To Belfast, to look at conflict resolution, conflict transformation in the midst of the Troubles. I know this is being recorded, so I'm a bit on thin ice. This group was put together, they went and they came back, and I had to moderate a conversation about what they learned, the deep impact. Tell us about that. It soon became apparent that the group had not done any preparation work before they went about the context of the Troubles in Ireland and Northern Ireland. They'd not done any homework on that. They went, they had a great time, they were received with great hospitality, and they came back with no stories. Because they didn't have the context, they hadn't done the homework, they hadn't been guided in terms of doing the preparation work, so they didn't really know the questions to ask when they were there. So it was a great visit, yay, but they came back, and in this panel, I'm trying to get some riches from that. They didn't have them. So what did we learn from that? We must go. My sermon this morning is about crossing boundaries. Jesus' disciples were always on the move. I think it's important that we go, but we go well and we go right, and we go equipped with understanding the context of where we're going, and we know the work of our partners who will enlighten us so that we can bring those stories back. So to me, it's all dependent on the preparation work, the integrity of the process in what a trip is, why you're going. One last thing. So we go to Cuba, and we've worked on this relational model. We're in partnership. We are not coming with answers. And you know Cuba quite well. We go, and there's the moment where we give the check, because there was a financial contribution. Because it's a partnership, it's all done very respectfully. Here's the check. Yeah. And somebody said, could you just let us know, what are you going to do with this money so we can tell that story when we get back? And our partner said, whatever you want us to spend it on. Whatever you want us to spend it on. It's your money. And I'm like, whoa. Wait a minute, we've tried to do this well in partnership, and we're supporting the ministry that you're doing. And here those power dynamics and hierarchies still come into play, even though we've done some integrity in the process. But I think if we keep doing integrity in the process, then we can do a bit better. And again, that's why you've got people like Lucy Crane and Elizabeth and the team of people around. Let's go, we must cross, or we must cross back and tell the stories of what's happening. You guys don't need to come to my sermon this morning, because that's basically what I'm going to say. Yes.
You know how I would find out, like, how to sign for like a medical mission trip to do something like that?
Well, we personally don't have any here.
Yeah, let's
They
connect.
concentrate on medical.
Let's connect.
But we do have ways our doctors and nurses have plugged in on all of our trips.
And some of the team that I'll be traveling next week also are medics. So yeah, there are ways. I'd love to make the connection.
Are you allowed to say where you're going next week?
I'm not sure.
He needs our prayers.
Yes, I definitely need your prayers. That would be most welcome. Yes.
I am curious from your talk and your stories, when are you coming back to Union so that I can be in your class? Is my first question, but then my serious comment is your description of how you felt with the church locking people out and the anger towards the church is something that since I began seminary has resonated so deeply with me. And even part of what inspired me to go to seminary is to learn how the church becomes so toxic and traumatic for so many people. the spiritual abuse, the religious trauma that a lot of times accompanies the average person on the street's conception of what a church is. And a lot of that comes, I feel like, from this toxic charity.
Yeah.
That you've described without using the term toxic charity. What resources would you recommend for people who are genuinely concerned with being Matthew 19:21 Christians? Sell what you have, come and follow me because you've given it to the poor. And one of the things that comes to my mind is Serving Money, Serving God by Cheryl Johnson. But I'm sure you have a plethora of other resources.
I do, and Robert Lupton's work, of course, Toxic Charity, started a whole new dimension of discovery and exploration. So there's some great resources that are actually out there, are helping churches do it better, to ask the right questions and to not categorize everybody into crisis. If people are facing the devastation of a hurricane, they are in a crisis situation, and the churches need to respond to that crisis. But where many authors would agree is that, but oftentimes we then create these situations of dependency where the crisis lasts for a very long time, where crisis is for a moment in time, but then we need to move to another space of journeying together, rehabilitation, finding out needs, listening to one another, asset mapping, all of that good stuff. So I have loads of resources I'd love to connect you. And my story did not end well at Union, but I love that. I love Union Presbyterian Seminary. They made good choices for the right reasons. I just miss it. So in answer to your first question, I'd love to come back and talk, but